This is The Naked Life with Roxanne Noor. Hello, my sweet people of the internet. Today, I want to speak about something that we all have experienced, and it's a feeling. The feeling is boredom. So, what exactly is boredom? And when we don't try to nurse our boredom, when we don't try to do something with it, what does that boredom become? What can boredom turn into when we basically allow it instead of trying to fix it? So, my definition of boredom and bringing the definition to actually what it feels like in a mental state is boredom happens when my attention is scattered. So, boredom happens when I have energy, I have attention, but it's not being channeled into one specific place. It's kind of fragmented, it's kind of all over the place, and I'm not constructing my time around something in particular. I'm not sure what to give my energy really to, and that's why I'm bored. There feels like there's nothing constructive for me to do. And that's also kind of a lie because there always is. And boredom becomes trickier when we try to fill it because most of the time we are filling it with things that really are not important. So I can think about one of the last times I was bored and I wanted to pacify it. I began doom scrolling and I began just going on this Instagram loop. And during it, I didn't feel bored anymore because I was really lost in it. But then after, I could feel how it was draining and depleting and actually made me feel worse. And yeah, when I think about when I get most bored, a lot of the time, it's when I've had to experience winters. So I primarily travel during winter, but the last time I had a real winter was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And because I couldn't go outside and I just felt so mentally drained, like I didn't have enough presence to read a good book or to write something or to really involve myself in anything, I just put Netflix on and I binge watched a show, and that also depleted my energy afterwards. So in the moment that we are pacifying the boredom, it feels nice because time moves quickly. But then once it's over, once the boredom has been satiated by just shoving it with whatever we can find, we usually feel worse afterwards. So, how can we use boredom? How can we allow boredom to happen? And why do we even want to allow boredom to happen? So, there's multiple findings that I have around this, and my findings actually come from seeing patterns with certain people in history. Okay, I'll give a few examples. Jean-Paul Sartre, his first book he ever wrote was called Nausea. And he's basically one of the fathers of the existentialist movement. He's a huge key figure in philosophy. And this book, Nausea, is really what propelled him even further into his studies, his findings, his career. He said the only reason that this book came into existence was because at that time he was forced into a German prison camp where he had very long hours of doing absolutely nothing. So he was in basically a prison camp and was extremely bored. And nausea was what came out of his boredom. His first novel was what came out of his boredom. And he said it never would have happened if he was not forced to access that kind of boredom. So that's an extreme example, but actually it repeats itself through history and with many prominent figures. Another example of this is Sri Aurobindo. So he started probably one of the largest spiritual communities in the entire world called Auroville. And he was basically at the time working against British rule in India. And he got thrown into jail for it, for doing political work. While he was in forced solitary confinement, he had a divine message from God and spirit or source, whatever you want to call it, the mother. And the message was, you are not meant to be in politics. You're meant to create the new suprahuman. And he followed that teaching that came from the boredom. And it's what allowed him to create Auroville, which is a massive spiritual community that has changed many, many people's lives and given them really beautiful teachings. So would this message have happened without being extremely bored? So what does that also mean? Boredom, in some sense, when you allow yourself to be bored, is just allowing the lack of stimuli. So in jail, there is a lack of external stimulus. You don't have the normal things to distract you. But most of us don't want to go to jail. I don't want to go to jail so I can have a spiritual experience or write a book. But there's ways in which we can access boredom or challenge ourselves so that it does give us really profound insights. And for myself, one of the ways I do this is through Vipassana, which is usually a 10-day silent retreat. It's Buddhist, and you're waking up at 4 a.m. You're silent. There's no phones. You're meditating about 12 hours a day. And in the beginning, for me, I've done it a few times now, and the first and second day, I'm so bored. I'm making up fantasies in my mind to distract myself from not doing anything. I'm creating weird stories. I'm basically trying to distract myself from the fact that I'm doing nothing and my time is passing so slowly. But past day 2, like around day 3, day 4, when I allow that boredom to just be what it is, it ends up not even being boredom. It's just stillness, it's silence, it's the emptiness. And from that emptiness comes the most beautiful, profound insights that really also like are derived from a deeper part of the self. I also have one friend who talks a lot about his creative process to me. So he's published, I think, 10 or 12 novels now in 7 different languages. And when I talk to him about his process of writing and what helps him the most, he says it's so important for him to have days of doing absolutely nothing and being bored out of his mind. So he's a very social creature. And so he won't see anyone, he won't party, he won't use his phone, he won't do anything. And through not really doing anything, he'll get really bored. And in those states of just allowing the boredness, he has some of his greatest solutions. So if he has he's unsure what will happen to one character in his book. He's thinking and he's like really unsure what comes next in his plot. What change does this character go into? He will have his bored days, and his bored days will give him that answer. And that's actually, it's extremely profound when you think of it. When you think about not filling space with frivolous things to distract us, when we feel like life isn't enough, instead of allowing the restlessness and the boredom to just eat us up, what does it feel like to actually be with it? Because if I'm looking at most of my life and the ways in which I felt bored, it was always uncomfortable, and I was always trying to pacify it in whatever way I could. And it never reaped anything. And all the times where I purposely have challenged myself and sunk into boredom, once I sunk into it, I was no longer bored. There was something that came out of it. And so I don't think it's any mistake that spiritual awakenings, great insights, artistic ideas happen to people when they are bored out of their minds, in solitary confinement, in vipassana, in prison, in a closed room of their own making. It's really there for a reason. And even if we think about history, why in history did people back in the day have so many more spiritual experiences or communication with God than now? I really think it's because it's easier to keep that connection to something greater when we are not distracted with superficial things. And so the next time that we feel boredom arise, how can we let it be there? How can we allow it so that fruits of boredom can arise? Yeah. And on a greater level, I see that the more and more I'm able to be present, the less and less I feel bored. I feel the most bored when I'm energetically depleted from not having good sleep, from not eating well. Things like very simple things take me out of presence. But when the body is fine-tuned, when the body feels healthy, it's easy for the mind to follow and to be robust and to see life around it and observe subtlety, to feel nuance, to see things as they are. And then it's even more difficult to even be bored. But it still happens. And I think the greatest thing that we can do for ourselves is to allow it.